It's the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. Green, gardening, and environment radio. Flavored with a dash of humor. Welcome to intelligent, irreverent talk about plants and the planet they grow on. Your questions, comments, and participation are always welcome at 877-711-5611.
Good planets are hard to find. Temperate zones and tropic climes. And true currents and thriving seas. Wind blowing through breathing trees. Strong ozone and safe sunshine. Well, good planets are hard to find. Good planets are in the man.
This hour is brought to you by Bartlett Tree Experts. Every tree needs a champion. Go to bartlett.com.
Jet streams, perfect air.
And here they are, Peggy Malecki and Mike Nowak.
Good planets are in the man. Right.
What a jerk.
Welcome to the show. And we have some special people around. By the way, that farm clip we played at the beginning, I had never heard of Drew Hastings. Had you, Peggy?
Nope.
Any idea?
Nope.
I go on the UN tubes.
UN tubes?
The UN, that's YOUAN.
I thought that was used tubes.
It might be, we could call it used tubes. Yeah, used tubes. I like that. Because I was thinking U and A-N-D, the U and the tubes. But used tubes sounds even better.
Hey, used tubes.
We have Ellie in the studio, not in the studio, in the control room with Andrew. Andrew, as you know, is a very important guy because
I have an ultimate storage capacity of 800 quadrillion bits. My total linear computational speed has been rated at 60 trillion operations per second.
And he's using all of them this morning. He's using all of them because, he's always juggling. Something's going on. Always something's malfunctioning. That's the way it works here, but we get through it. But in addition to Ellie and Andrew, we have two new interns today. Interns.
Woo-hoo.
And that's the ding for Hannah Singh, the Sing Ding. And this one is for Kayla Dalia. So they each get their own dings here. And they're from Loyola, the Environmental Studies program at Loyola University, right here in the great city of Chicago. And unless they get terrified and run screaming from the room sometime
we lock the door.
Yeah. Oh, good. That's what we always do. So welcome. We're glad to have them on board. Justin Fluke is sitting outside. Guess what? We're talking farming today, but it's urban farming or growing vegetables in your own backyard in the big city. We hope you stick around for that. You got to plan sometime, so do it now.
Chicken in the corn, on the corn can't grow, mama. When chicken in the corn, so the corn can't grow. When chicken in the corn, so the corn can't, mama. When chicken in the corn, so the corn can't grow. On my way to San Francisco.
Yeah, welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. You probably haven't heard that guy before. I was asking the folks in the room.
I have no idea
Anybody
who that
in
is.
the control room heard this before? No? Okay. All right. It's from 2014, and it's a guy named Brushy One String, and basically he and this was from
one finger chords, in other words.
well, not only that, there's only one string on his guitar.
That's what I mean. One finger chords.
Yeah. And that's a song called Chicken in the Corn, which I think is very appropriate today, although you don't have any chickens there, do you, Justin?
I used to.
Really?
Yeah, we had 3 of them a while back, but got rid of them. So.
Okay. Okay. And that's Justin Fluke will be with him in just a second. But Chicken in the Corn is the song from, I guess it was a documentary called Into the Great Wide Open in 2014. And it kind of made this guy. He's been doing this a while. Brushy One String. What he did is took all the strings off the guitar except one. I should have done that. I could have been famous. It would have been a lot easier for me to play a guitar if I had done that. So that's who that was. Just for you music fans out there, I'm not particularly hip, but every now and then I go to the used tubes and find something like that. And as I mentioned before, in the studio we have Justin Fluck from Fluck Farms Chicago. Whatever the heck, Fluck Farms Chicago.
And I'm going to ask if you can pull that mic a little closer to you.
Yeah.
All right, and let's explain how we met Justin, because we've talked for the last several years, Peggy and I, about Chicago Excellence in Gardening Awards, and basically it is a citywide gardening program, awards program, where we go all over the city, and it doesn't matter where you are. And if you're listening to this and you have a garden and you think it's worthy, you should enter the contest by going to Chicago Gardening Awards, ChicagoGardenAwards.org. Or go to
after April 1st.
After April, yeah, but go there now.
You can go there now and
You
see
can't,
last year.
you can't enter right now. Nobody's going to enter right now anyway because it's January. All right, they're just gonna say my garden's not ready. I don't know what my garden's going to look like.
So that's Chicago Gardening Awards.
It is Chicago Gardening Awards.
.org. See, we're in the off season.
Yeah, you know, when you start working on it all the time,
Yeah.
then you remember these things. ChicagoGardeningAwards.org. But you can also go to the Facebook page, which is Chicago Excellence in Gardening Awards. You'll see photos. You'll see people with signs. You get these beautiful signs if you are an award winner and you put them in your yard. Have you put the sign in your yard yet?
I have it resting next to the garden, and in fact, I was looking at it this morning. I could see the snow had melted to a degree where I could see some of the garden. So, you know, we're not quite there yet, but I'm starting to think about it.
So Justin was one of the award winners this past year in 2019. And in over 3 years, we've given out more than 150 awards in the city of Chicago. And by the way, I should mention the Mike Nowak Show is one of the chief sponsors, Natural Awakenings Chicago, Illinois Extension, Chicago Flower and Garden Show, Park District of Chicago, the Forest Preserve District of Cook County, all kinds of
Shed Aquarium.
Shed Aquarium are all involved in this, and there are more. We just have this ton of people who want to make this happen because it's really important. In wherever you are in the country, whatever city you're listening in right here, you know how important gardens are. You love your garden. You're impressed by your neighbor's garden. You know it changes the neighborhood. You know it changes the world. You grow your own food. You're self-sufficient. There's so many reasons to garden. And Justin entered the contest, and I happened to be the judge for Justin's garden. And he's kind of in my neighborhood. You're in Logan Square, Avondale / Avondale. So I went over there, and it's a two-lot garden. But you use basically, I wanted to say about, and I wrote on the blog, if you go to mikenovak.net, you can see the blog post. I thought it was about 500 square feet, really, of your garden. Would you say it's about that?
I don't know about square footage, but it's about half of the second lot. Yeah, and I've got it all fenced off and built that out. Like the first year that I moved into my house, I sort of had like a makeshift like chicken wire and stakes thing, and then my younger brother had lived in the coach house for the first couple of years, and so we did like a Home Depot run and really really kind of like built out the proper fence that's around it now. But I mean, you know, going back to the awards thing, I just wanted to say a friend of mine had just sent me the link randomly one day. I look at it on my phone. I said, that looks like a fun thing, right, to get involved with. So I think on the spot, I had just filled everything out, sent along a couple photos and said, sure, I'll just try to give this a shot. And so I didn't even know about it. I think awareness is a big thing. If anything, I'm hoping that whatever I post and being a part of the event helps other people find out about it. And I encourage anyone to jump in and submit. I mean, this is the first year that I had done it. And the more people that can find out about it, I've already told like a number of friends who are gardening and say, hey, just like get in on it, you know? I mean, especially for the vegetable growers, a lot of the stuff at the awards ceremony was for the ornamentals and flowers. And, you know, I'm encouraging anybody that I know that's growing anything to get involved and just kind of try to showcase what they've got going on, because it's really not rocket science.
Yeah.
It's about just doing it. You know?
And learning from everybody else.
Yeah, of course, and being inspired. And that's one thing that we talked about a little bit this week is just when I went to the awards ceremony, just being inspired by what other people are doing and getting different ideas on, either things to grow or the way that they're growing things, or just realizing that, oh, you can grow this sort of thing in our climate, because that's, of course, something that you've got to be conscious of being in the
Yeah,
Midwest.
and I think people looking at your garden, and I might be jumping ahead a little, but the fact that you had 2 different varieties of corn, a lot of people in the city may think, I can't grow corn in my backyard.
I know, and he has 2, and one was early harvest and one was later harvest, right?
Yeah. So,
Can you tell me what the varieties were?
yeah, let's see. My dad
Oh,
always
and by the way,
orders-
he's got, okay, we got to get to your dad and your family, but folks, hold that. We got to put that book up there. Hold up your book, okay?
So-
For those folks watching on Facebook, and if you're listening on the radio, you don't see this, but he's got a little diary here where he puts all his chicken scratchings in, speaking of chickens. And this is what they tell you to do all the time when you get into gardening, is have a little, what do you call it?
a garden log or something.
Sure,
I don't
a
really,
log,
you
yeah.
know. I mean, it's basically I do like a sketch, and sort of like visualize where I want everything to be, and I kind of start out with like the big main principal items that I grow, being corn and tomatoes, which take up the most space.
Sure.
But I sort of plot those out. But then as I'm thinking about it, you've got to keep in mind like where the sun is and what's going to get the most sun. So the peppers have to be in the sun. You've got like your greens.
Yeah, you can't put the corn on the south side because it'll shade everything else on the north side.
But then I try to rotate it because I think they deplete some of the nutrition within the soil each year. So I rotate the corn and just try to flip-flop it a little bit. But yeah, first thing is I just kind of like plot everything out. I generally know what I'm growing year to year. I try to swap in a few new things each year. So I'm inspired to add new things either from the award ceremony, or I was just down in Mexico and met a guy from some organic farm up in Vancouver, and they grew like mainly
How did you meet a guy with an organic farm in Vancouver in Mexico?
a friend of a friend, and we were drinking wine and just like chit-chatting, and he had mentioned that they were growing mainly like Asian vegetables, so I thought maybe I'll grow some bok choy, because then I just get inspired, and like I brought 3 vegetable cookbooks that I just got recently to inspire me to cook different things, because half of the reason that the bulk of the reason why I'm growing all these vegetables is so I can consume them, right? And you want to find different things to do and make with the food that you're growing. So like I recently got into eggplant a few years ago, and now I'm making like Korean eggplant dishes and stuff like that. So it's always fun to say, okay, like what can I do with like tomatoes? You can do a million things with tomatoes, right? So
Sure.
I'm trying to think of different
And
vegetables.
it's what
that I can-
everybody wants to grow.
Yeah.
Tomatoes are top of the list. They're not always the easiest to grow. They're not that hard, but the easy things to grow are basically zucchinis and squashes. Those are pretty...
Peppers are really easy to grow, I mean, stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, for anybody who's starting out, I would just say, do a tomato plant, do some pepper plants. That stuff's easy. I mean, you almost can't kill it, as long as it's watered. And
that with tomatoes, and pretty much any plant, but mainly tomatoes, you want good tomatoes, consistent watering is the key.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't want blossom end rot and that sort of thing happening to your tomatoes. I mean, there are insects and diseases as well that you have to watch.
Chipmunks.
And but those are in your yard. What are the critters
Rabbits.
that you have?
In the city, I was just going to say, I had a rat problem for a while, but that's why I had gotten a cat from the Treehouse org.
Mm-hmm.
It's this cat rescue program within the city where you can, rescue stray cats and then basically sort of raise them for 30 days on your property.
Is that Kiko?
Yeah, Kiko. So she's still a feral, like wild cat, but she essentially lives under my deck. I've got a little 3-walled shelter for her. It's heated during the winter. It took 3 or 4 years for her to let me pet her, but now we're tight homies. But ever since I got her, I mean, I was killing rats left and right, and they would come in and like nibble on my tomatoes. And you've got this beautiful softball, like ripe, gorgeous tomato.
Yeah.
It's got one little nibble out of it. You're not going to eat that, right?
I can't tell you how many tomatoes I lost last year. I was growing them in the yard next door because the yard next door has all the sun. And
His dead neighbor's yard.
My dead neighbor's yard, right. She's still dead. And I don't even know what I was going to say. You just threw me off there, but that's okay.
That you lost a lot of tomatoes.
Well, yeah, and
that had little nibbles out of them.
Yeah, but I don't know if they were rats or squirrels or what.
Yeah,
but it was very, very frustrating.
Well, and you lost cantaloupe.
Yeah, and they go after
Couple years
cantaloupe
ago, too.
Yeah. She's been 100% effective since I've gotten her. They don't come around.
What I want to
And-
ask you is how do you get a feral cat to come home with you?
Well, here's the deal. So they set you up with basically a double wide dog cage. It's
The old double wide.
yeah, well, and it's like a not-for-profit organization where they, take the cats
Yes.
off the streets, spay or neuter them, and then it's a 30-day process where they give you like a double wide cage. They want to start you out with at least 2 or 3, and then you keep them in there with a litter box and food, and you bring them food and water each day to sort of like gain that trust, right? So it's
Okay.
this slow process of them understanding that you're their
So you're bringing them
caretaker.
home in the cage, and you're giving them food and water for a long time. How long was it before you could open the cage and
think
not
it's-
worry about the cat running away?
Well, it's like the 28th day or 29th day or something is when you just open up the cage. Then for the following days, if they don't take off for good, then you sort of like remove the whole cage. I had 2. They recommended 2 or 3 or 4. I wanted just 2 to begin with. One of them bolted and took off, and he's been gone since then, right?
Okay.
Kiko disappeared for maybe like a week or so, but then she started coming back around and then realizing that there's a consistent food source to come back. And then, and then she just started being there every single day, and she was around each morning when I would bring her food. And so we got into this routine. But then even then after that, it was still about 3 years until she let me actually touch her and pet her.
Wow.
But now she's there all the time. And yeah, it's
and
great.
there
I
are
mean,
no rats in your
there's
yard.
there's no rats, and like she's got the whole like domain is all hers. So in the summertime she's sitting up on the railing, and I see her like sitting in the brush, like taking the sun in and all that. So it's nice. Yeah.
And we have about a minute and a half here, and then we're going to break. But that's a different problem from what many people have. That's an urban problem. In the city, you'll also have rabbits, squirrels.
I have fencing around my yard for that too, just to keep some of the rabbits out, because I was getting those for a while. But then I just put like black mesh fencing all the way around my yard, just so they don't come in and poop in the yard.
Peggy has chipmunks from hell.
Hot and cold running chipmunks.
Okay.
Obviously, if you're in the burbs, there are deer. We saw deer here at a block from the station last week. There were 3 deer in a backyard here. It was, and it leads to something that we're going to be talking about very soon when we have Doug Tallamy on the show, who's written a new book. He writes about it, and he says, we protect all of our deer. We don't protect our predators. We're killing all the predators, and then we have these deer population explode. And then they devour all the foliage, which creates all kinds of other issues. So, folks, you might like deer, but they got to be in smaller numbers. All right, that's Justin Fluke. We haven't gotten into a lot of this. I want to talk about how you began doing this, how you treat your soil and other things in the yard. He's from Fluck Farms Chicago. It's the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki, and we will be right back.
There's no time for this or that. Go and get the shovel. There's no time for anything else but digging up that honeysuckle. Honey, oh my honey, we are in deep trouble. There's no time for anything else, just digging up that honeysuckle.
Welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. Yeah, those of you in the city don't have to worry too much about this, but folks in the burbs and in the country know that honeysuckle is a pernicious invader. It's an exotic invasive plant, and then folks have to get out and dig it out. I've seen areas downstate where you'll see all this green in the summer, and you go, oh, that's very lush. Well, it turns out it's all honeysuckle, and it's all one species of plant or a couple of species of honeysuckle.
And one plant that's just...
And so I want to thank my friend Mac Austin, who gets her own ding there. She sent me from the used tubes root docking invasive bush honeysuckle, and it shows you how to dig it out. And then at the end of it, there's this little song. You got to get the honeysuckle out, and it.
The food is getting thin, but we're gonna have to get out of this house because the honeysuckle's sneaking in.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you, Mac.
So I just thought, yeah, I'm gonna play that. Okay, and
she did kind of tip us off that there was some good music with it.
yeah, exactly. So there you go. We are with Justin Fluke here, and by the way, that's spelled Fluck, but it's pronounced Fluck from Fluck Farms Chicago, a winner in the Chicago Excellence in Gardening Awards in 2019. His mom is listening. Is dad listening, do you think?
I
Tim?
would assume so, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, I
yeah.
saw somebody else in your family pop up.
Oh, yeah.
So the whole family's here.
Probably, yeah.
Just wave. Everybody wave to Justin here. And that's a good place to start, Bear, because he's got this beautiful, and I mean beautiful. It's so clean. That's one of the things I loved about your garden / farm. The lines are so clean. Is that on purpose? I mean, you've got your little sketchbook there where you sort of map out what you're going to do. And as I started to say before, that's a really good idea for beginning gardeners. I actually did that a few times, and then that's just not me. It's not the kind of guy I go out and freelance it, and that doesn't always work out that well. So this is a really good thing to do, is have the little diary or the log where you go in, and then you know next year what you did last year.
Yep.
And that helps. With me, it's usually photos. I go back and I look at the photo from last year because they're my children, so I take photos of the things I grow. But your gardening passion started with your father and your grandfather, right?
Yep.
Talk about that a little bit.
And really just learning from my dad. I mean, he learned from his dad. His dad learned from his dad. But just being a kid and helping my dad out in the summer and the spring to help plant the garden, from just being out there with corn seeds and learning to just dig a shallow hole and then kind of, sprinkle a few in and pour some dirt on top of it, right? Or picking strawberries or, harvesting stuff when things came into season. But just kind of following him around and just kind of learning from him directly, right, on how to do some really basic things, and then like seeing what my grandparents had done within their garden, and then continuing that.
You must have liked your parents and your grandparents. I mean, to follow a lot of kids they're off doing something else and they're not interested at all. Why do you think you were so interested?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think it was anything I was forced to do. I just, I thought it was an interesting thing to kind of see how it worked out. And he had a nice big garden. I mean, probably bigger than mine, just a different sort of shape. But I just thought it was really interesting. And then the older you get, you start to understand and get that appreciation for the actual taste and like the flavor of the food, and understand that, wow, like this tomato that I just grew tastes a million times better than anything that you can buy in a store or something like that. But that doesn't kick in until later.
And when you're a little kid, there's some degree of wonder too of pulling the carrot out of the ground or something. I remember my grandfather every day. I would go with him to the garden, and the vegetable wasn't there yesterday and it was there today. And as a little kid, that was just so cool.
That and just having food at your disposal. And I think, going back to my grandfather and like before that, I mean, these victory gardens were big during like World War II, where, people were growing their own food to sort of like help the economy.
Well, at one point in America during World War II, 44% of the vegetables grown in America were in backyards.
That's awesome. Yeah.
If we could do it then, we could do it now.
Yep.
And I think that's what part of this movement is about. People don't know where their food comes. They don't trust what has been applied to their food, the chemicals, and the techniques used to grow. And you can do it in your backyard and grow a lot of the stuff yourself. Not necessarily all of it. You're not going to grow lemons here in Chicago, but certainly, as you say, tomatoes and chard and whatever else.
It's a funny thing, too, because I had grown up sort of essentially eating organic food, but it wasn't a thing that we really called it organic food. It was just the way that my dad grew stuff. I don't think there was really anything that he really put pesticides or, chemicals on. I mean, trial and error with certain things like broccoli and cauliflower where you get some bugs and like things like that. But, this organic food trend or whatever current trends there are, it's like, okay, we've sort of been eating that way anyway. We just never really put like a name on it. So that's kind of interesting.
That's the best way.
Just what you did.
Yeah, right.
So there's no stigma attached to it. And,
Yeah.
and you don't have to explain yourself. You say, no, this is the way we grow stuff.
Yeah.
So you got this from your dad and your grandfather. How is it you came? How many people can get a double lot in Chicago in Logan Square.
I really lucked out. I mean, this was 2012, I think. Yeah, 2012. And I think I mainly lucked out just because the photos were awful on Redfin or like wherever they were posted, right? Is that it wasn't clear really that it was a double lot. It wasn't clear that there was a coach house behind it. So my realtor, who I had seen, I don't know, half a dozen places with at least,
drinking wine with in Mexico, right?
No, this is a different guy, but he said, well, let's go see it. And I'm always, like, let's go take a look. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. And then it had just ended up being like the right spot, and was able to sort of finish it up. The house was like halfway renovated, but I was able to use a first-time home buyer's loan and then sort of build it out to what I wanted it to be. So,
all right. And then did you decide right away that you were going to garden or farm in the yard?
No, that was something that I definitely was.
That's why you bought the house.
A huge appeal, right? And having that extra lot not only gives me the opportunity to garden, but then I get really wonderful sunlight that comes in to the house from not having a building directly next to me. But I've been gardening really on my own since I had lived in Brooklyn. I was in New York for about 6 years and had a very small little plot within like a community garden, probably about the size of this table. So that's when I really kind of started doing my own thing, right? And but when you're working with this much space, And
a lot of people do. In the city, if you might live in an apartment and there's not much you can do, and you go out. My friend Mac, who sent me the honeysuckle song, has a plot with Peterson Garden Project, who you might be familiar with, and this is how you grow stuff.
Even if you've just got an apartment with really no yard, I mean, I've seen people growing tomatoes and peppers on fire escapes in, patio type tomatoes. So you can start out at any sort of level or scale. And now I was just able to finally get like the really big spot that I wanted. And then was able to just have what I have now and kind of blow it out and do like a larger scale operation.
All right. Now, one of the things that impressed me when we came to see the garden. All right, so it's in this. There's the house. That's one lot, and then there's the lot next door, and you've taken about half of that, and you've created a garden out of it. There's all lawn, the rest of it, and those of you who are not lawn fans are going to go, ooh, lawn. Well, you don't put any chemicals on that lawn, right?
I do like a weed and feed.
Oh, no, don't say that.
Sorry. Well, and I've had some issues with some creeping Charlie. It's just been taking over the yard. So I had to put some chemicals on that.
But then, that's the thing. But you use that to mulch your garden.
Well, that's why I did it towards the end of the year last year to make sure that I wasn't putting any of that on the garden come springtime.
Okay.
So, I tried to sort of kill that off at the end of the year, and so I was strategic about when I'm putting that stuff onto the garden. So.
Because when we came to see your garden, now, first of all, I'm going to say you don't need it. Okay, creeping Charlie or not, you can rake out some of the.
I don't know, man. It was really.
I know
if it's
there,
taken over.
It's aggressive. It's tough when it's in a lawn.
Yeah.
But there are natural ways to get it out, and one of them is attack it at the right time of the year, like when it's flowering. Yeah. It's vulnerable because it's putting a lot of energy into the flowers.
Sure.
So that's a good time to start raking that sucker out,
Yeah.
and if you just sort of keep up with it, you can and overseed so that the lawn crowds out the creeping Charlie after. I understand because it's a big area you've got there, and I'm sure you don't want that. On the other hand, if you put creeping Charlie, if you chop it up and put it as a mulch, as long as you don't have roots there, it's not going to root in your garden. And even if it does, creeping Charlie in a garden is easy. You just go and you pull it out.
Especially when it's
in a
when
lawn.
It's muddy,
In a lawn is where it's tough.
Yeah.
But what we were impressed with, we came out to see you in like late July, and you said at that point you had not watered the garden once that year.
Right.
I don't even know how that's possible.
Yeah, well,
it was a wet spring,
and we got into like the mulching conversation, right? So I had finally gotten like a lawnmower that has a bag, and so I bag all the grass and then sort of spread that out throughout the garden to make sure that then it keeps the weeds from popping up, then also locks in the moisture. And it's funny because I was texting some friends just before this, and they were talking about how you should mention, I'll do my like yard work right, and then you'll sit on the porch and have a beer or whatever, and have this satisfaction of like a beautiful manicured lawn. So
he's trying to get it both ways. Okay, that's Justin Fluck from Fluck Farms Chicago. Let's do one more segment with him. I want to talk about some of the varieties you grow and some of the difficulties you might have had with some of the vegetables in your yard. Hey, it's January. This is what you do. You talk about gardening. Says because you can't do it. The Mike Nowak Show with Peggy.
Cherries.
Just a wild mountain rose needing freedoms to grow. So I ran, fearing not where I go. When a flower grows wild, it can always survive. Wildflowers don't care where they grow.
Welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki, and that was another request. This time, Kathleen said we got to play trio. Yeah, talking about wildflowers. We're not actually talking about wildflowers today, but throwing this into the mix.
It fits in.
With Dolly Parton and Emmylou Harris and Linda Ronstadt, we saw a pretty cool documentary on Linda Ronstadt on CNN recently. So that reminded us of that, and we're playing that. We've got Justin Fluck in the studio from Fluck Farms Chicago, and we're talking about, we're having a cup of coffee. We're talking about what are we going to do this year? What are we going to plant?
Planning out the garden.
Yeah. Put a little Bailey's in there, please. Yeah. now it's all coming into focus or out of focus. And during the break, Justin and he's got his fan club out there who basically they say Justin's hot. They're telling us that and he is. I mean, no offense.
He's blushing now.
Because one of the things I wrote in the award ceremony when he came in, I said, Justin makes growing vegetables cool. And he does. You got this coolness about you. I don't know what I've been trying to get that for my whole life. I don't know how you get that. But you were talking in the break about you want to get a fruit tree in there, and we were recommending a book that we talked about on the show last year, and it's by Orrin and Manjula Martin called Fruit Trees for Every Garden. I would highly recommend that. And the best thing that he does is he tells you how to prepare the ground, because Orrin has been doing this for 40 years in California, and he tells you how to set it up so that you're jump-starting your tree. A lot of plants, you try to get them acclimated to what's in the soil already. Here he says, no. You want to bring in the best stuff because a fruit tree is different from other trees. It's going to produce these fruits in there, so it's taking a lot of energy to produce fruits. And you want it to do it quickly, and it normally takes a few years for them to get to the point where they can do it. So you want to supercharge your soil so that the fruit tree will grow fast and produce fruit quickly. I hadn't ever thought about that.
Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. So I would say pick up, and you obviously like book. Let's show these some of these books that Justin brought in. This one is called...
This is Root to Leaf, A Southern Chef Cooks Through the Seasons by Stephen Satterfield.
You almost got it on the screen.
Yeah,
it was close.
That one looks cool, and I've barely had a chance to flip through these yet, but that one is kind of taking you through the journey from spring to fall, right? So you can do things with radishes in the spring, or do things with sweet corn and tomatoes during like the heart of the summer, or do things with kale or greens and stuff like that as like the year progresses. So hopefully the goal of these books, and that one in particular, is sort of finding different things to do with the vegetables as they come into season.
Yeah. And I've got this book as well, 6 Seasons, A New Way with Vegetables.
I can hold that one.
And it's broken down by seasons.
I've started bookmarking that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's 6 different seasons of vegetables. That it's not just root crops in the winter.
Some friends of mine who we used to, and hopefully we'll go back to do this annual fishing trip, we started putting together a cookbook ourselves. So there's about 7 or 8 of us, and it's all these recipes that we sort of find online or have been passed on from like families, but we're piecing together like sort of like a fun cookbook that we're going to be...
Can I give you my quinoa and kale recipe?
Sure, yeah.
Can I say I made that for dinner last night?
Did you really?
Yeah,
The quinoa?
I make that all the time.
Oh my gosh!
Thank you. It's a wonderful recipe.
Oh, great! We got to put it in there. And then the third book you've got there is very interesting.
Yeah, I had just I'm a subscriber to Nat Geo, and I was on my last trip. I was flipping through the magazine and came across this article about these centurions and these blue zone areas throughout the world where people. There are these small pockets on different continents where there is an unusual high amount unusually high amount of people who are living 100 years plus, right? So, and it all goes down to like the diet that they've been eating since they were kids, and really not being in these sort of like commercial areas where they get sort of ruined by like processed foods and things like that. So this book then kind of gets into those specific areas, the different foods that they're eating from Japan to California to wherever. But I'm definitely curious about what I can get into there. And
that's called the Blue Zone's Kitchen. All right. Real quick, I want to talk about some of the things you like growing, some of the varieties you've discovered work well in your garden. Your dad says your soil is excellent.
Yep.
You do compost, right?
I don't know much about the soil. Yeah, each year, I really I always add, I don't know, 5 to 10 bags of like organic compost that I get from the nursery or Home Depot or something like that. But just to throw on top of it, because you lose some soil naturally.
I will point you in the right direction, but it doesn't seem that I have to because you're already doing a good job. But I always tell people when you're buying stuff from the box stores, be careful because sometimes you don't know what's in the bag. I like going to a garden center and saying, hey, what compost do you guys use? What do you use for your stuff? What do you like? Where do you get it? And that's always a good way to go.
I try not to buy a whole lot from Home Depot, but there's a really great garden center down the street from me on California called Adam & Sons. So I do grow some of my
Where's
stuff.
Where's Adam & Sons?
It's just south of Division on California. It's a family-owned operation. It's a small little spot within the city, and it's great. I mean, I do grow some of my stuff by seed, so I get them out of this young seed catalog that my dad's been ordering from for years. So I'll do sweet corn and some carrots and stuff like that. But with the shorter growing season here, I try to buy plants for the tomatoes. So you're eating tomatoes in July. And
what kind of
like
tomatoes
August.
did you grow last year?
Last year I grew, let's see here. I started growing them vertically a couple years ago, which has been a big improvement too. My grandpa
Rather than
used to do
them
that.
Sprawl?
Yeah, right. Well, having those circular ones, they get really heavy and kind of spill over, and it's hard to access them. So I sort of like constructed this big wire mesh, like horseshoe shaped thing.
Sure.
My grandpa had been doing it like that, and I actually saw them doing the same thing at Lincoln Park Zoo. But I always do 4 different types of tomatoes. So last year I had big boy tomatoes, Bush Celebrity tomatoes, black cherry tomatoes, which I find I like the small ones, but the cherry ones are so much better than the grape ones. And then I had a Mountain Fresh tomatoes, which was like a Colorado variety that I found last year.
We need to get you some Garden Gem or Garden Treasure this year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you do pretty well with those. Do you pay attention to the heirloom varieties?
A little bit. I've done some like a Cherokee purple, like those are really fun to grow, and just like anytime you can shake it up a little bit with color
and they're
and
delicious.
flavor. Yeah.
And the corn. What kind of corn did you grow? You got like 20 seconds here.
Yeah, my dad sends me a couple like early sweet corn ones, and then it's usually a couple of like the early ones, and then like the coarse summer. But
and have you had success with corn?
Oh yeah.
I mean, it looked beautiful in your yard. So.
Yeah.
All right, that's Justin Fluck, Fluck Farms Chicago. Thank you so much for coming into the studio. For those of us listening locally, we'll be back with the second hour. For the others, go green or
go home.
Show with Peggy Malecki. We have no idea where that came from. You can fade that sucker out right there because that's not our second hour intro. That's from like a year and a half ago.
Really old.
That just sort of showed up in the system. Okay, we told you that Andrew was scrambling here today, and he is. That's okay. Welcome. Let's tell you that the second hour of the Mike Nowak Show is brought to you by Bartlett Tree Experts, because every tree
needs a champion.
Go to bartlett.com. Well, we'll be having a little discussion after the show. Like, where did that come from?
Yikes.
For you interns in the control room, that's live radio. That's how that works. We have a few little things here before we get to our guest.
Yeah,
and
speaking of new sponsors, too.
We're very happy to have Dr. Nicolaas Mink back in the studio to talk about sustainable seafood. He's the best. And Sitka Salmon Shares is also the best, and he'll be here in a second. But we're getting a lot of response to Justin Fluke's appearance on the show. Not just the Facebook people who think he's hot, but I got an email from my buddy Dan Costa at Vern Goer's Greenhouse in Hinsdale. He says, "Hi, Mike. For limited space," and I hope you're listening, Justin. For limited space, there are pillar apple trees, very narrow and upright. We have 3 or 4 at Goer's, but I'm sure places like Yosemite Garden Center on North Clark Street will have them. A lot of places would have them, or you order them online.
Or the Young catalog. The Young catalog has a lot of.
Now, is it Young or Jung?
I don't know. That's why I said Young and Jung.
Yeah, I think it's Jung.
They sell bare root trees. Years ago, I bought some bare roots from them.
And they do therapy as well, the catalog, because it's Jung.
Yes.
All right, there we go. The Jungian therapy.
Jungian approach.
You can get upright apple trees. There are places you can fit them in. Justin's worried about the shade issues and the sun issues, and you can do that. We have a couple of things coming up we got to let you know about. One of which is another new sponsor on the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. And that is the Allen Centennial Garden. And they are doing their spring symposium. If you go to our website, MikeNovak.net, and you probably heard it, one of the commercials that flew by. Although we don't know, Andrew, if it did, because we can't hear the commercials today. So I'm hoping it played. And if it didn't, we'll put it into somebody else's show. They're having their spring symposium March 27th and 28th at the University of Wisconsin campus in Madison. And boy, have they got some great people there to talk about resilient landscapes. And among them are people like Rick Dark, who has written a book with Doug Tallamy. He co-authored Designing for Beauty and Biodiversity in the Home Garden. He's also written The American Woodland Garden, Capturing the Spirit of the Deciduous Forest, The Wild Garden, Expanded Edition, and Gardens of the High Line, Elevating the Nature of Modern Landscapes. The High Line is in New York, of course. We have the 606 here in Chicago. So Rick Dark is one of the speakers. I'm looking very eagerly at Mickey Fern, who's a professor of the practice at North Carolina State University. He is with the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Management at NC State. And he's looking at the historic influence of Black communities on landscapes and offer contemporary context. I'm actually kind of hoping we can get him on the show because we're going to be talking to at least one of these speakers. Jennifer Jewell will be there.
She's got her new book coming out this spring.
And she hosts Cultivating Place, Conversations on Natural History and the Human Impulse to Garden. Barbara Deutsch, Landscape Architecture Foundation. Great people. So listen for that information and go to my website, MikeNovak.net. You'll see the logo on the homepage. You can click on it. When we come back, we'll also mention the Pullman Garden Club Winter Lecture. We'll do that before we talk to Dr. Nicolaas Mink from Sitka Salmon Shares. It's the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki, and we'll be right back. All right, enough of that. Welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show. Are you familiar with that bit, Nic Mink from Monty Python? We lost one of our Monty Python
I saw that.
guys.
Yeah.
No.
Terry Jones. Just sad. The albatross bit, which is
Albatross!
And Terry Jones is part of that. He plays the guy who comes in and orders albatross from the guy carrying the albatross tray around. And
haven't seen that one.
It was done live in a lot of places. I don't think it ever made it to the TV show or the movies. Anyway, but I digress. That is Dr. Nicolaas Mink, the CEO and founder of Sitka Salmon Shares. In full disclosure, they have been a sponsor of the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. And but we love having him come into the studio because I learned so much, not just about sustainable fishing and seafood, but about climate change.
And our
because
oceans.
our oceans, one of the things the average person, I think, misses, especially if they're landlubbers like us, living in the middle of the continent, is the profound changes. Well, except that we have the lake levels going up, and Rick DeMaio, and I need to mention this, Rick DeMaio is going to be here later, and I posted something that there was an article in Chicago Magazine about the lake levels, and the guy we had, Dan Egan, on the show in 2017, who wrote a book about the Great Lakes, said something about why the water level is so high, and I wrote to Rick DeMaio, and I said, look at this, and he said, oh, he got it completely wrong. And I said, oh, my goodness. Okay. So he will be on the show and we'll talk about that. But even the Great Lakes are not immune to climate change.
I'm watching the dune lands erode as we speak in southern Lake Michigan. It's amazing. Oh, yeah. Bodies of water are changing more quickly.
And I don't think that folks understand that when they look at climate change, you've got to look to the water because that's where all the heat is being stored, isn't it?
That's where the heat is being stored, and that's also where the carbon is being stored. I think some studies suggest that about half of the carbon that we've released into the atmosphere since the 1880s is now being stored in the ocean. And yeah, oceans are warming more quickly. They're warming more unpredictably. And as someone that spends half my year in Alaska, obviously we know that the further north we are in the world, the warmer it's getting and the more unpredictable weather is getting. And I think 2019 was a real a year that people are going to look back at, and that was the year even in the Midwest where people have been seeing the real effects of this changing our changing ecosystems. But we've been seeing it in Alaska for the last 5 or 6. When I moved up to Sitka in early 2010s, it was 55 degrees and rainy every day. That was the climatological pattern for the last 150 years, and we've consistently been, I think, 6 degrees above normal.
Wow.
Which is for fish or for birds or for trees,
or
flora,
permafrost.
The permafrost. I mean, it's all happening very, very fast and right before our eyes.
And what folks, again, I say those of us in the lower latitudes don't know is how fast the change is happening in the upper latitudes, and those are the danger signs. When you see all those maps about climate change and it's all red at the North Pole, you look at that and we had snow in Chicago. It doesn't affect me. Look at the red at the North Pole and at the South Pole.
Yeah, I think most of northern Alaska has been 5 or 6 degrees above normal for the last 3 or 4 years, and the scary thing is we're now on that hockey stick, and so there is no normal. We don't know what normal is because these old predictive models and analyses that used to be able to help us understand what was going on with the world are increasingly not reliable. Because the new normal, or there is no new normal. The normal is instability, change, and in Alaska we're on the front lines, so to speak. We're seeing some of our first communities that are being moved because of climate change.
They can't stay on the ocean.
Yeah, because the communities are falling into the ocean. Native communities are falling in the ocean right now. They're not able to harvest the foods that they historically had been able to harvest. It's the change is happening fast, and it's happening radically. And it's only a matter of time. We know that we're going to start seeing that in the lower 48.
Well, we already are.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Lake Michigan. Is it connected to climate change? It's one of the questions we'll ask our meteorologist, Rick DeMaio, today. Sorry.
I was going to say, one of our listeners also pointed out the seabirds that are dying. Well, but how that all the seabirds, depending on the food, that's depending on that's depending on that, and then when the water is warmer, it all changes.
Yeah, Google massive seabird die-offs in the Aleutians, and we've lost hundreds of millions of seabirds in the last 10 years from the changing food web in our oceans, and largely caused by new warming and cooling patterns in oceans. And the other big thing we could talk about is ocean acidification, right? Because where the carbon is being sequestered, it's being sequestered in the oceans. It's and it's taking H2O and turning it into calcium carbonate, which doesn't allow shells to form in zooplankton. So you have this really important part of the bottom of the food chain not being able to develop, and it's affecting everything in the oceans.
Tell us a little bit so folks can get a sense of who you are and what you do. What your PhD is in?
History and environmental change and natural resource management. So I became a fishmonger somewhat accidentally.
Because you spend half of your life here in the Midwest and half of it in Alaska, right?
Yeah. Half of my life is spent, living in the Midwest and teaching at Knox College in Galesburg, where I, teach these things every day in a really wonderful environmental studies department. And then half of my life is spent doing this fishmonger thing, which is we have a company that is 30 small-scale fishermen from Southeast Alaska who provide seafood largely to Midwestern consumers. So, the genesis of the company 10 years ago was really just me working in Alaska on academic projects. And this is an academic project. Academics know that projects get away from you. And
gardeners know that too.
Yeah, gardeners know. Usually it's a book, right? Most academics write this, their grand tome of their life. And really mine has actually become this business, which is, trying to figure out more environmentally as I said in this essay, I want to move past sustainable, but environmentally thoughtful ways and socially thoughtful ways to harvest fish from the ocean. And even in the face of climate change, and especially because of climate change, we need to be all that more thoughtful about how we harvest fish and where we harvest fish and when we harvest fish. But I think it's still a really important part of what we eat, what we should eat. And, my interests are supporting these small-scale traditional fishing communities and fishermen. And that's kind of my weird academic project that I, do half the time and then, teach in Galesburg the other half.
Well,
you study in contrasts.
I'm fascinated by the study in contrast, and you alluded to an article you wrote for the New Food Economy called "In Memoriam: Sustainable Seafood, 1992 to 2019." That's a really scary title. So why did you put it that way?
Well, I wanted to provoke a conversation among people. So, we live in an age of shock and awe. But the point of the article is that, sustainable seafood is really a moment in time, right? And it emerged in the 1990s as a response to social changes about where people wanted their food to come from.
But also, you point to a date in 1992, and it was
the cod moratorium off of Newfoundland, and
the Canadian government said you can't bring in any more cod from here.
It profoundly changed the global seafood eating and harvesting economy, culture, and institutions. And really, we've been living in the wake of that moratorium for about the last 25 or 30 years as it relates to how we understand seafood, how we harvest seafood, how we interact with fishermen, and really and then the end of sustainable seafood, I kind of said what happened with another cod moratorium that just took place in the Gulf of Alaska, where the National Marine Fisheries Service quite unexpectedly shut down one of the North Pacific's largest fisheries, which is this cod fishery. And it was not because of overfishing like it was in Newfoundland, but this was a very, very clear a shutdown because of the radical changes that were happening in the ocean that didn't allow cod to be able to produce in their historic habitat.
Yeah, this was just last month.
And this was just a month ago. And it's not that there's not cod in the ocean, but how we manage these cod is very place-based. And, cod are moving north, or cod are moving south, or cod are moving to colder waters. And new species are coming into these historic cod grounds that management, at this point really isn't set up for, right? So, this was I think this is going to be a kind of another watershed moment in seafood management and seafood eating when you have, sort of out of the blue, a change in the cod populations, like managers saw in Alaska.
Well, and yet you write, and you said here in the studio just a couple of minutes ago that you can still eat fish. It's still a viable form of food. Yet the government of Canada has said you can't fish for cod off of the Atlantic coast there. The U.S. government has just said you can't do it off of Alaska. So how is it that it's still a viable business at all?
Well, what I'm saying is there's a great quote that I didn't include in the article, but I cut it, and it was from a NOAA scientist. And the oceans are our most productive food producers, far more productive than land.
Mm-hmm.
And they're always going to be productive. But what we don't know is what they're going to be productive with. And when you think about eating in the Anthropocene, or whatever we want to call this, in the world of climate change, there's no food that is more climate friendly than eating wild foods, right? Because it is a direct connection between the sun and the production of the food. There's no fossil fuels. There's no buying or selling. It is the sun's energy directly into in this case, wild fish. And
but there is some fossil fuel. A boat takes fossil fuels to run. And there are other things, the flash freezing, I imagine, takes some kind of fossil fuel engagement.
Well, the flash freezing is almost all, we're totally water powered, most of Southeast Alaska.
Okay.
The boats do consume some fossil fuels, but if you look at the climate impact of eating wild foods, it's far better than agriculture.
What about farmed fish, though, and it being flown here to be processed and back here, and the carbon footprint of all the flying?
Yeah, carnivorous farm fish is probably, which is farm salmon, is probably the worst thing that you can eat from a climate perspective. And one of the things that is, really irks me is you have a lot of these, kind of boutique farm salmons that are being flown all across the world, and and tons of packaging and with a huge carbon footprint, calling themselves sustainable. Maybe the production of that fish is you could say it's sustainable, but certainly the transportation of that fish isn't sustainable. I mean, at Sitka, we offset all of our carbon using basically a local Juneau company that has they do kelp farms. So we do it that way, and then we do everything in our power to use wind energy. So we're pretty carbon neutral.
You're not sending your fish to China to be processed.
Yeah, and everything comes by boat or truck, which is 40 to 100 times less carbon than flying something. So,
getting back, we're going to break here in just a second. Getting back to the farm raised fish, so you would say the reason they're not sustainable is not so much with the actual raising, but of the transportation of the fish, the transport.
It's complex.
Okay.
There's many gradations of farm fish.
Uh-huh.
And some are better than others.
All right, we will leave it at that. That's Dr. Nicolaas Mink, CEO and founder of Sitka Salmon Shares. You're welcome to give us a call, 877-711-5611, or Facebook or Twitter. It's the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki, and we'll be right back.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. This is going to go very fast. What would you like to get into? I do want to talk about Pebble Mine, but
we can talk about the farm fish thing, and its climate impacts. I mean, that's
not a bad way to go.
Yeah, we could continue that discussion.
And I still want to ask the question: is with 7.8 billion people on the planet, how can the seas continue to sustain that many people?
The seas produce far more food, far more efficiently than land does. And I've seen.
I would imagine because they're left for the most part in peace. If you can go off because they're so huge, there's so much
it's
space.
huge, but it's more efficient. It is the sun's energy creating phytoplankton, which creates zooplankton, which creates fish, which creates bigger fish, which we can harvest, right? And it does so more efficiently. The ocean converts the sun. It's one of the reasons why oceans are warming faster, because the ocean converts sun's energy more efficiently into biomass than land does. Land takes a lot more. The way that I've heard it explained is land takes a lot more space to produce the amount of food that the ocean can produce
per acre, or however
whatever you want to call it, per acre. Yep.
Yeah.
And so it's odd. I think we were going to increasingly need to be relying on our oceans. But management's just, I mean, the cod closure is the case in point. Modern management is a 20th century. We have good management in the United States, but modern management is a 1970s and 1980s and 1990s phenomenon, right? Like all things, all institutions, everything's going to have to change because of how profoundly the world is changing.
Yeah, and how quickly.
And in a way we've never seen.
Yeah. Well, we probably won't have time, but also like to just touch on that whole seafood being labeled sustainable.
Yeah.
As you say, all packaged and repurposed, but is it?
Yeah.
There's some new, I won't mention the brand, but a new one that just came out with.
It's the food universe, the morals.
I'd like to get into that.
Yeah.
Are complex. It's all trade-offs. It's extremely complex, and for ag, we've kind of have a decided upon lexicon, right? It's not decided upon with seafood. There's a lot of gray, a lot of gray. The Ministry of Silly Walks was the
Yes.
Monty Python bit that I remember my dad loving, and the dead parrot.
Yeah.
Selling the dead parrot. Those are the two.
Norwegian blue. Lovely plumage.
Mm-hmm.
Is dead.
He butchered up the daisies. All right.
Yeah, and I think it's, no matter what the food is, be it seafood, be it organic, it's so hard for most people to keep up with it.
Oh yeah, I think people understand organic is we know that some of the worst problems that we have in with labor and social justice is in organic food,
and that's
large scale organic, right? And people, I think there's
20 seconds.
Consumers that are understanding that a little bit better now.
All right. Welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki in the studio. And it's always great to have you come into the studio all the time. I love that. Do you have to tool in from Galesburg?
I came from Madison this morning.
Did you really?
Yeah.
What was happening in Madison?
Thank you.
I'm half time there. We have an office there.
Yeah.
But Mike Gordon from Fish played there last night, so that was the big reason.
You could have played a Fish song.
With a PH.
Well, if you would have told me, I will play a Fish song coming into the next segment. How's that?
It was a great show.
Was it? Good.
Oh,
You're
incredible.
You're a Fish fan.
Well, in my younger days.
You know what? I look at you and I wish I were at your age right now. That's Dr. Nicolaas Mink, Ph. Well, that's repetitive. Okay, that's redundant. Nicolaas Mink, Ph.D., the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Sitka Salmon Shares. Boy, all the great conversations happened during the commercial breaks, but we got to try to recapture some of this. And we were talking about farm raised, and you said you might get into that, but we were also talking about why the oceans are the best place to produce food. Let's start with that, because I thought your explanation was pretty elegant. I hope you can recapture that.
Good luck. No, the oceans are the most efficient producers of food that we have. They're far more efficient than land-based food production, and that's because the ocean converts the sun's energy, which is the basis of the food chain, into things we can eat much more efficiently than land can. And it's from the sun to phytoplankton to zooplankton to small fish to big fish that are then harvested. And it does so in a far more efficient and productive way than terrestrial, than agriculture. And so when we think about climate-friendly foods, the most climate-friendly foods is, how do we take the sun's energy? I mean, it's what we're doing with wind energy. It's what we're doing with, solar energy. How do we take the sun's energy and produce food in the most environmentally sensitive way that we can? And I think the ocean is one of our most important tools in being able to figure out humanity in the 21st century.
So we have to treat it right. We've got to stop acidification. We got to stop the warming.
Yep.
We have to get the plastics and the microplastics out of the
Yep.
ocean. We haven't even addressed that. How does that impact what you're doing?
Well, the big one that we're really concerned of, I mean, what we talked about earlier is the food universe, the moral food universe is very, very is ambiguous and gray, and it's all about trade-offs. And the big thing that we're really concerned of is ocean acidification, which is right now we're in a place where crustaceans, which the most important crustaceans for us are zooplankton because they're the bottom of the food chain, they can't produce their shells anymore. And
At all, or
they're increasingly showing signs of them not being able to produce their shells, and essentially we could be in a situation in the next 10 or 20 years where we've wiped out this core part of the bottom of the food web, which are these zooplankton. And we know, and there's a wide variety of species that eat these zooplankton directly. The one that we care about is sockeye and pink. And so what's going to happen to them? Are they going to be able to transition food sources? Are there going to be massive changes to those populations because of that? I mean, what consumers will notice is there is a lot of discussion about not having commercially harvested crab, particularly in northern latitudes, in the next 20 or 30 years. The last document that I read from the state of Alaska is they're not expecting a commercial king crab fishery by 2050.
Wow.
That's
huge.
That's in our lifetime, and that's ocean acidification because crustaceans aren't going to be able to build their shells.
And on top of this, you mentioned the Anthropocene earlier, which is the age of human beings, for those of you who are not yet familiar with that term, which is now everywhere, so get used to it.
Yeah.
And one of the things is we don't help things. We do things inadvertently that cause damage to the oceans, and then we do things on purpose that cause damage to the oceans, like the pebble mine that's being planned in Alaska. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, if you don't know anything about the pebble mine, I mean, there's a struggle for the soul of Alaska right now, related to the current governor, who's basically a tool of oil and gas and mining, and what a stupid thing you're doing at the when we should be transitioning away from this. But the Pebble Mine is going to be one of the world's largest open pit mines. It's going to be in southwest Alaska, and it's the story is it's going to be the largest, most significant mine in the world on what is now the largest wild salmon run anywhere left in the world. And we know, if history is any guide, we know that the story of these large open pit mines are that they are, that they don't pollute, and that we've got, a great new technology that's going to make sure that everything's going to turn out okay when we build these mines and have these slag pits. And example after example suggests that these, where they're putting this mining pollution is going to profoundly affect these salmon runs. Maybe not in the next 10 or 20 years, but certainly in the next 100 years.
And then they're going to leave behind these deposits.
The tailings never go away.
The tailings never go away, and then the way that they to produce these metals is an incredibly toxic thing. And we have a current governor, the Obama administration and the previous governor, as well as the EPA and as well as the Army Corps of Engineers was all ruled against this, and it seemed like that project was at a standstill, if not totally ended. But in the last 6 months, the new Alaskan governor has revived it, and it's a really scary thing. This is, again, these fish that live in the North Pacific. This is one of the last great wild food sources that we have. And the salmon in Bristol Bay, which is where this mine is going to be, is one of the last great food sources, wild food sources that we have anywhere in the world.
All you need to know, and you look at the photos, if you're going to do an operation like that, you're going to be bringing in heavy machinery, you're going to be bringing in people, you're going to be bringing in fuels and toxic things you need to use to create the machinery that is going to,
building 80 miles of roads.
And that's even before you start extracting the metals.
And the thing that we know will happen is these, they have to build giant, basically cesspools of these tailings, which are highly toxic. And we know that eventually those dams that hold those impoundments that hold those tailing pools back
They
fail.
will leak.
They always fail.
Well,
Plus, there's a fault up there.
Correct.
We have the coal ash problem throughout the lower 48, including Illinois, and our friends have been fighting that in central Illinois.
Great analog. I mean, the big one that just happened was on the Fraser River about 5 or 6 years ago. One of the last remaining big watershed salmon runs, and there was a tailings dam failure there 5 or 6 years ago, and that run is a tenth of what it was.
Well, I'm into naming names, so the governor's name is Mike Dunleavy, and you should know, and I put a couple of articles on my blog. You can go to MikeNowak.net, MikeNowak.net. The Natural Resources Defense Council wrote a blog piece, and they went so far as to call Governor Dunleavy a puppet for the Pebble Mine.
Yeah, he's a puppet for large-scale industrial mining, logging, and development interests. And what we were talking about earlier is, there was a clear understanding from the 1970s all the way through, a year ago that Alaska, the maintaining of that land, for fisheries, and it's a national interest issue. This isn't like a local economic development, right? We look to Alaska as citizens of the lower 48 as a place that it is in the national interest to protect, and that's in the 1970s when basically most of Alaska was set aside as wilderness, and
which a lot of people resented in Alaska.
The common understanding was
in the Tongass, the Tongass that people want to cut that down, and I'm like, where else are we going to find old-growth trees in the world?
The Tongass is 10 million acres, the size of most of our New England states. That's one of the last pristine rainforests anywhere.
And we don't learn.
And it's now under. We're looking at the roadless rule being taken away.
All right, you got 45 seconds. We need to give a plug to Sitka Salmon Shares. What do folks need to know about 2020? It's your 10th anniversary season, isn't it?
It's our 10th season, yeah, surprisingly.
Give them a ding for that.
You can go to www.sitkasalmonshares.com, and we're a community-supported fishery that supports the livelihoods of 30 small boat Alaskan fishermen and delivers their harvest into the Midwest once a month during the summer. Everything's flash frozen. The supply chain, we have carbon offsets, and it's a great product, and it's a great company, and that's not just me talking.
And of course, I have a share, and it is the best fish I have ever tasted, and Peggy can confirm that as well. Again, the website is
www.sitkasalmonshares.com.
Nicolaas Mink, thank you so much once again for coming into the studio. Meteorologist Rick DeMaio is next.
Yeah. Should I?
Right.
Can I stick around? And
sure. You can contribute.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I mean, get them to do a weather forecast for the west coast of Alaska.
Yeah, it's actually gotten cold there for the first time in years.
Are you getting some of that cold coming? It doesn't have that far to come down like it does here.
No.
And here the whole week's going to be flat.
Yeah,
it's going to be flatlining.
And we've talked with Rick multiple times about the blob, as it were, the warm water blob that affects the weather here.
And the blob is responsible for the cod shutdown.
Yeah.
And the blob is responsible for tremendously huge harvests of pollock and good king salmon. So it's good and bad, right?
It giveth and it taketh away.
But management is not used to the blob, right?
Yeah.
The blob, the way that we manage fisheries is not, to have these crazy climate anomalies of 5-6 degrees, and a new one's forming right now. It's not. We're not set up to be prepared to understand really what's happening with fish populations. And so it just makes management that much harder.
So you're saying that despite having fished for millennia, we really don't understand how fish work and how their populations grow and shrink.
Well, we were starting to have a much better understanding.
We don't have Rick. It's going to voicemail. So.
Oh, okay. He'll get back. Well, if it's not him, we'll talk about the blob.
Well, great Dan Egan's book on the death and life of the Great Lakes is one of the best environmental books that I've read in the last 5 years.
We talked to him about that 3 years ago when when the book came out, and it's just amazing when you think about the Great Lakes and everything that is attacking the Great Lakes, starting with, hey, let's open up the St. Lawrence Seaway and just bring in all these invasive species. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah.
All right, I've got music ready.
Yeah, well, the one article that I was reading that Audrey had also referred to was on the Global Research Canada site, where it says it's the tip of the iceberg 2019 Alaska seabird die-off, talking about just the record numbers of birds.
And we've been seeing, I mean, it is my friends that are ornithologists there. It's they can't not put words to it.
Yeah, and it's starvation.
Yep, starvation.
Wow.
By the and
I have a friend that's a marbled murrelet researcher, which is
the big die-off.
And they're gone from it's like passenger pigeons. Again, passenger pigeons of the 1880s and 1890s killed by hunting. Yeah. Now we have marbled murrelets being killed by starvation and climate change.
The precise toll is unclear. It says the biggest murre die-off on record in Alaska and a precursor to near-total reproductive failures for murres in the Gulf of Alaska and Bering, following the deaths of thousands of puffins found last fall on St. Paul Island.
Yeah,
and more murres before that, and they can't even see them because most of them die at sea.
Yeah, I mean, there's all these islands that have been these great bird sanctuaries off of Alaska. Most of them are protected as national wildlife refuges, and birds have just disappeared from them. These were places; these are little islands.
I'm going to see if we can get somebody to see your face. You're like, we got. This is something we need to think of in the future. Is I don't want the mic in the middle of their face. That's just not good.
Yeah, it's the mic. This overhead is the problem.
Okay, well,
he's over there.
All right.
I can't see the bags under my eyes from the fish show.
All right, there we go. And it's better. So don't go with it. Stay on the left of it.
We also need to mention the Pullman Garden Club.
Yes, I wanted to mention that real quick. Let's do that very fast, and then we'll get into it.
1, 2, 3.
Welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. Boy, we got a lot of stuff to get done in this final segment. Meteorologist Rick DeMaio is standing by. We wanted to mention that today at the Pullman Garden Club, they're having the winter lecture with Roy Diblick, friend of the show, Roy Diblick, and it's at 3 p.m. at the Pullman National Monument Shared Visitor Info Center, and that's 11141 South Cottage Grove. I think it's called 11141. Is that how we learned this summer?
Or 11140. I don't know. Went in one ear and out the other.
I know. We learned it on the south side because there's a way they do the numbers on the south side, and if you don't get it right, then you're an alien being. 11141 South Cottage Grove in Chicago, 3 p.m. The important part, Roy Diblick. The name's the same.
Maybe Rick will be there,
too. It's the same person. I don't know. Roy Diblick will be there, and of course he is a friend of the show and has works with Pete Udolph and has written the No Maintenance Garden and on and on and on. So we love Roy. So you might want to go to the Pullman Garden Club winter lecture this afternoon at 3 p.m. And we still have Nicolaas Mink in the studio. Let's bring in meteorologist Rick DeMaio. Rick, in the break, we were talking about, Nic Mink goes to Alaska half the time, and he fishes out there. You were with, what were you doing when you contacted us earlier this week?
Well, I was in the Gulf of Maine, which I was scalloping.
You were scalloping.
I was scalloping in the Gulf of Maine with a few partner fishermen and friends of the company. Mm-hmm. And there's a body of water that's supposedly changing faster than anywhere else in the ocean.
Yeah, when we talked about seaweed a couple years ago.
Right, and we were talking to Nick in the break, Rick, about the blob on the off the coast of Alaska and how that's changing the nature of the fish there.
When you say blob, I think the listeners need to realize that's the above normal temperature anomaly you're referring to, Mike.
Yes. Yes, I'm sorry.
Right.
We were
it's an old movie, one of the two.
commonly known as the blob.
Well, people could be thinking of something that eats fish, but yeah, I mean that blob, we still think is probably the result of the northward extent of the excessive late season typhoons that kind of push that warm air northward, and the way that the water circulates in that particular area. Once you get a body of warm water up there, it kind of moves, kind of like the hands on a clock. It doesn't really get pushed east or pushed south. It just kind of sits there and spins for a while. And sometimes the long-term, long-range, large-scale winter pattern sets up either over it or somewhat to the west of it and kind of maintains it. And then if we can make it all the way through the winter season and it doesn't get disturbed too much, you start out the spring and summer season with temperatures that are above normal. And I look back at what happened this past weekend, or not this past weekend, but Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And one of the reasons why we basically stayed above freezing throughout much of the duration of the snow Friday night into Saturday was because we had a wind. Well, I shouldn't say Saturday, more so Friday. We had a wind off the lake, and usually in the middle to end of January, you don't think of the lake as a warming event or a warming component, but it was. The lake water temperature probably about 34, maybe 35 degrees in the middle of the lake, even though there's some ice along the shoreline. And I think that had a large part of why the system never really was able to generate much snow along the lakefront. Think about it. This was the third Friday to Saturday system that we had, and it involved freezing rain, sleet, and wet snow. You don't normally see that in January, do you?
No, not at all. In fact, we were just looking at the temperatures forecast for the coming week, and they're like, it's straight across. There's very little change.
Yeah. The stuff I just sent you was pretty much stuff that I do for the people I forecast snow for. And even though they were happy that they got some snow, particularly to the north and west, for 4 to 6 inches fell in a very, very small area. By and large, this was another underperforming snow event. I think we're right at, if not slightly below normal for the year snow-wise, only because we had a lot of snow in the month of October and early November. But what's striking, Mike and Peg, is the lack of cold. Nothing in the way of any 0-degree temperatures coming at us anytime soon. The coldest we've been so far is 2 above, but I took a rather lengthy walk along the Lake Michigan shoreline this morning, and it's really good to point out the fact that there's probably about 10 to 20 feet of ice along the lakefront, and that's basically the pancake ice that developed a few days early in the week. That's just because we were cold overnight. And then that east wind kind of pushed that kind of slushy pancake ice along the shoreline. So now at least we have a bit of a buffer zone. But anywhere along the northern part of the city of Chicago, you look at the Rogers Park area, Lee Street Beach, some of the beaches in Wilmette, they're destroyed. I don't know how they're going to clean this up or how they're going to fix it, but hopefully they're going to begin to think really long and hard about the short-term consequences of what could become, a long-term discussion. We talk about the Gulf of Maine and the Gulf of Alaska, but I think it's right here in our backyard that a warmer climate is definitely ruining our beaches here.
Yeah, I got some photos from one of my listeners, Bob Casera, in Rogers Park, of these trucks just loading in these tons and tons of rock along Rogers Beach, which no longer exists. Because they're doing that, and very quickly, I pointed out that story that was in Chicago Magazine. That was an interview with Dan Egan about why we're having the lake levels rise, and you kind of rebutted that. What was your take on that?
Well, I just don't think his scientific approach was very accurate. He just said the reason why the lakes are why they are was because of the polar vortex the last few years. And producing all this ice, which meant that the lake wasn't able to evaporate water out of it. I don't know where he kind of came up with that, because to get ice on the lake, you first need to have extremely cold air, and usually the extremely cold air leads to tremendous amounts of evaporation, lake effect clouds, and a loss of lake level. Then you form the ice, and then the ice basically begins to kind of seal up the lake a little bit. But the duration of time that the amount of ice is on the lake that has any sort of impact on evaporation is pretty short. It's a very, very small period of time. So that really wasn't the reason why the lakes are high. It's basically fairly simple. 2 to 3 consecutive years of a lot of rain, 2 to 3 consecutive years of lack of cold, and 2 to 3 consecutive years of lack of heat. And all those things lead to an increase in water over a long period of time. The lake could easily go down 2 or 3 years from now, but the bottom line is the trend is there. Higher lake levels, less ice, more beach erosion. That's the death of the Great Lakes right there, at least the shoreline.
All right, give me a 20-second forecast here.
All right, temperatures basically in the mid-30s for the next 7 days. A little bit of snow coming at us Thursday night, but otherwise nothing significant for the next 8 to 10 days, and nothing below zero for the next 15 days.
Wow. Okay. Thanks, Rick. We'll talk to you next week. I want to thank everybody on the show today. Justin Fluke, Dr. Nicolaas Mink. Until next time, go green or
go home.
It's over. How'd you like it?
I don't know. I slept through the whole thing.
Well, you didn't miss much.